The Galactic Alliance, a coalition of powerful alien species, had long established itself as a dominant force in the galaxy. Known for their superior diplomatic maneuvering and overwhelming military strength, the Alliance wielded influence with a heavy hand. For centuries, they had expanded their reach, using aggressive negotiations, economic sanctions, and veiled threats to bend weaker civilizations to their will. Diplomacy, for the Alliance, was often just another weapon, a way to subjugate without firing a shot. Their reputation was built on a simple truth: when the Alliance wanted something, they would get it, one way or another. As the Alliance's reach extended, they inevitably turned their attention toward humanity. Earth and its colonies were seen as valuable additions to the Alliance's ever-growing domain, but rather than launching a direct assault, the Alliance opted for their usual strategy of encroachment through diplomacy. They began by testing the waters, small, seemingly benign requests for trade agreements that subtly favored the Alliance, minor territorial adjustments that ceded space to them, all under the guise of mutual benefit. Human leaders, eager to avoid conflict with such a formidable coalition, often conceded to these requests, believing that compromise was the path to peace. But the Alliance's demands grew bolder with each success. Economic sanctions were imposed on human colonies that resisted, under the pretext of enforcing galactic trade regulations. Diplomatic envoys from the Alliance would arrive with smiles and promises, but always with underlying threats that were impossible to ignore. Human territories were slowly being chipped away, not by force, but by the relentless pressure of diplomacy wielded like a weapon. The more humanity yielded, the more the Alliance pushed, confident in their ability to bring humanity to heel without ever firing a shot. Within human society, frustration began to build. The once hopeful belief that peaceful negotiations would safeguard their future was giving way to a growing sense of betrayal and anger. The concessions made by human leaders were seen by many as acts of weakness, as the Alliance's demands became increasingly unreasonable. What had started as a series of diplomatic talks had turned into a slow erosion of human sovereignty. Each new agreement seemed to take something away from humanity, whether it was territory, resources, or dignity. The Alliance's influence was creeping ever closer to Earth itself, and the public's patience was wearing thin. This mounting frustration found a voice in Alexander Cade, a rising political figure who had begun to challenge the status quo. Cade was unlike the cautious leaders who had preceded him. He spoke openly about the dangers of appeasement, and the need to stand firm against the Alliance's encroachments. His rhetoric was fiery, filled with promises to protect humanity's interests at any cost. Where others saw diplomacy as the only option, Cade saw it as a trap, one that humanity was falling into with every concession made. Cade's reputation for being ruthless and uncompromising quickly made him a polarizing figure. To his supporters, he was the leader humanity desperately needed, someone willing to do whatever it took to defend their home and their future. To his critics, he was a dangerous provocateur, likely to lead humanity into a war they could not win. But as the Alliance's demands grew more egregious, Cade's message began to resonate with a broader audience. The idea that humanity needed to stop talking and start standing up for itself was gaining traction. As Cade's popularity surged, so did his influence. He called for an end to the constant concessions and warned that the Alliance's intentions were far from benign. He pointed to the growing encroachments as evidence that diplomacy had failed and that humanity was being led down a path of submission. His speeches were filled with calls to action, urging humanity to prepare for the inevitable confrontation that he believed was coming. Cade argued that the only way to truly protect their future was to show the Alliance that humanity would not be bullied, that they were willing to fight for their place in the galaxy. The turning point came when Cade was elected as president of Earth and its colonies, a clear mandate from a population that had grown tired of the Alliance's manipulations. His election was a signal that humanity was no longer willing to be pushed around. Cade wasted no time in implementing his vision. He began to strengthen humanity's military capabilities, investing in advanced technologies and fortifying defenses across human space. Under his leadership, humanity was no longer content to wait and see what the Alliance would demand next. Cade was preparing for the day when talking would no longer be enough. The stage was set for a dramatic shift in the balance of power. The Galactic Alliance, accustomed to getting what they wanted through diplomacy and coercion, now faced a leader who was not afraid to confront them head-on. Cade's rise to power marked the beginning of a new era for humanity, one where they would no longer be content to play the role of the compliant junior partner in galactic affairs. The tension between humanity and the Alliance was reaching a breaking point, and it was clear that under Cade's leadership, humanity was ready to fight for their future. The Galactic Alliance, growing impatient with humanity's refusal to completely bow to their demands, decided it was time to force the issue. In a covert operation, the Alliance launched a surprise attack on the human colony of Arcadia, a thriving settlement known for its strategic location and rich resources. The attack was swift and brutal. Cloaked warships descended upon the colony under the cover of night, unleashing a devastating bombardment that leveled entire cities. The death toll was catastrophic, with tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The Alliance believed that this show of force would break humanity's resolve. They expected that the sheer scale of the destruction would intimidate President Cade into submission, forcing him to concede to their demands and bring humanity back to the negotiating table in a weakened position. It was a tactic that had worked countless times before with other civilizations. But this time, they had miscalculated. President Alexander Cade's reaction to the attack was immediate and furious. News of the massacre on Arcadia reached him within hours, and the images of the devastation filled him with a cold, burning rage. This was no longer just a political struggle or a battle for territory. This was a direct assault on humanity's very existence. The Alliance's actions were not just an act of war, they were an unforgivable crime against innocent lives. For Cade, this was personal. The decision to abandon diplomacy was made in a heartbeat. Cade had always been skeptical of the Alliance's intentions, but now they had shown their true colors. Any hope of a peaceful resolution was gone. The Alliance had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Cade knew that humanity could not afford to show any further weakness. The time for talking was over. It was time to fight. Within hours of the attack, Cade addressed the people of Earth and its colonies in a speech that would be remembered for generations. Standing before a world in mourning, Cade's voice carried the weight of a leader who had reached the end of his patience. He spoke of the lives lost on Arcadia, the families destroyed, and the future that had been stolen from them. But his words were not just those of grief, they were a call to arms. Enough talking, Cade declared, his voice steady and unyielding. The Galactic Alliance has shown us their true face. They believe they can intimidate us, that they can break our spirit with violence and terror. But they are wrong. We will not be cowed. We will not be broken. They wanted a war, and now they will have one. We fight not just for our survival, but for our honor, our dignity, and our place in this galaxy. It is time to show the Alliance, and the entire galaxy, what it means to provoke the wrath of humanity. Cade's words ignited a fire within the human population. The grief and anger felt by billions were channeled into a unified resolve. The sense of helplessness that had lingered during the years of diplomatic maneuvering evaporated, replaced by a fierce determination to defend what was theirs. Across Earth and its colonies, people rallied behind Cade, ready to support the war effort in any way they could. Factories that had once produced consumer goods were swiftly converted to manufacture weapons and military supplies. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, eager to join the fight. Humanity, long underestimated by the Alliance, was beginning to reveal its true strength. Under Cade's leadership, the mobilization for war was rapid and efficient. The military, which had been quietly preparing for this possibility under Cade's orders, moved into action with a precision that caught the Alliance off guard. Fleet commanders who had been relegated to defensive postures were now given orders to take the fight to the enemy. Advanced weapons systems, which had been kept in reserve, were brought online. The full extent of humanity's military capabilities, which the Alliance had arrogantly dismissed, was now being unleashed. Cade's strategy was not just about defense, it was about turning the tide and taking the offensive. He understood that to win this war, humanity could not simply react to the Alliance's moves, they had to strike back with overwhelming force. Every facet of society was geared towards this goal. Research and development teams worked around the clock to refine existing technologies and develop new ones. Intelligence agencies launched operations to disrupt the Alliance's command structure, gathering crucial information that would give humanity the edge in the battles to come. The Alliance, which had expected a demoralized and weakened enemy, was now facing a force they had never anticipated. The war they had sought to impose on humanity was becoming a quagmire, and their initial confidence was rapidly eroding. Cade's leadership had transformed what could have been a disastrous situation into a rallying cry for all of humanity. The world that had once been on the brink of submission was now a war machine, ready to fight for its survival with a ferocity that would soon become legend. Under President Cade's command, humanity's military potential, long underestimated by the Galactic Alliance, was finally unleashed. For years, humanity had quietly developed advanced military technologies, hidden from the prying eyes of the Alliance. Now, with diplomacy abandoned and war declared, these cutting-edge weapons and systems were brought into action with devastating effect. The first signs of humanity's true power emerged with the deployment of stealth fleets, a technological marvel that had been in development for decades. These ships, equipped with advanced cloaking devices, could move undetected through space, launching surprise attacks on Alliance fleets and installations. The Alliance, used to relying on their superior numbers and technology, found themselves blindsided by these invisible predators. Human ships appeared out of nowhere, striking with precision before vanishing back into the void, leaving destruction in their wake. But the stealth fleets were only the beginning. Humanity's arsenal included energy weapons that bypassed conventional shields, advanced drones that operated with near-sentient AI, and kinetic bombardment systems capable of devastating entire planets from orbit. These technologies, kept secret until now, were deployed with ruthless efficiency. The Alliance's fleets, once thought invincible, were torn apart by weapons they had no defense against. The shock within the Alliance was palpable as they realized that the war they had started was not going to be the easy victory they had anticipated. As human forces pressed their advantage, the Alliance's confidence began to waver. The initial stages of the war, which they had expected to dominate, turned into a series of humiliating defeats. Cade's strategic brilliance became evident as he exploited the Alliance's weaknesses with unconventional tactics that left their commanders scrambling. He understood that the key to victory was not just in matching the Alliance's strength but in outmaneuvering them, hitting them where they were weakest and least prepared. Cade's strategies were as audacious as they were effective. He used misinformation and psychological warfare to sow confusion among the Alliance ranks, causing them to misallocate their forces and resources. Decoy fleets lured the Alliance into ambushes, while human strike teams targeted critical supply lines, leaving entire sectors of the Alliance's territory isolated and vulnerable. Cade was not afraid to take risks, and his calculated gambles paid off with a series of early victories that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. One of the most significant victories came in the Battle of Vega Prime, where a human fleet, heavily outnumbered, managed to destroy an entire Alliance armada by exploiting the gravitational anomalies of the system. Cade had anticipated the Alliance's conventional approach and used it against them, turning what should have been a decisive defeat for humanity into a crushing blow for the Alliance. This victory, and others like it, forced the Alliance to reconsider their tactics and left them on the defensive for the first time in their history. As the war dragged on, the Alliance's initial bravado was replaced by a growing sense of dread. What they had thought would be a quick and decisive conflict was turning into a protracted and costly war. The Alliance, once the dominant force in the galaxy, was now struggling to keep pace with an enemy they had vastly underestimated. Every battle revealed new layers of humanity's military capabilities, and every defeat further eroded the Alliance's morale. Cade's leadership was instrumental in this shift. His willingness to make hard decisions, to push his forces to the limit, and to adapt to the changing dynamics of the war, kept humanity on the front foot. Under his command, human forces remained relentless, refusing to give the Alliance a moment's respite. The Alliance, caught off guard by the intensity and effectiveness of the human counteroffensive, found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts, stretched thin and unable to predict where the next blow would land. The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting, and the Alliance, once the unchallenged rulers of the stars, were now facing the very real possibility of defeat. The war they had started, confident in their superiority, was becoming their greatest nightmare. Humanity, led by a determined and ruthless leader, was proving that they were not just a force to be reckoned with, they were a force that could reshape the future of the galaxy. As the war between humanity and the Galactic Alliance dragged on, the toll it took on both sides became increasingly apparent. The early victories won under President Cade's leadership had come at a steep price. Entire fleets were lost in brutal battles, and cities that had once been thriving centers of life were reduced to ashes. The casualties were staggering. Millions of lives were lost on both sides as the conflict escalated beyond what anyone had imagined. For every inch of ground gained, there was a heavy cost in blood, and the longer the war continued, the more it became clear that no one would emerge from it unscathed. Cade's aggressive strategy, while effective in keeping the Alliance on the defensive, also demanded sacrifices that few leaders would be willing to make. He was unflinching in his decisions, prioritizing victory above all else, even when it meant sending soldiers into battles they were unlikely to survive. There were moments when entire divisions were sacrificed to achieve a strategic objective, their lives traded for the promise of a broader victory. Cade's willingness to make these tough decisions earned him both fear and admiration. To some, he was a necessary force of nature, a leader who understood that the harsh realities of war required equally harsh measures. To others, he was a cold, calculating figure whose ruthlessness seemed to know no bounds. These decisions were not made lightly, but they were made with a clear understanding of what was at stake. Cade knew that humanity could not afford to lose this war, and he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to ensure victory. But as the body count rose and the destruction spread, the cost of his approach began to weigh heavily on those around him. His advisors, military commanders, and even the public began to grapple with the moral implications of the war. The question of whether the ends justified the means became a constant undercurrent in the conversations that took place behind closed doors. The moral dilemmas faced by humanity during the war were profound. The line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred as Cade's strategies pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in warfare. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, entire planets were turned into battlegrounds, and the once clear distinction between combatants and non-combatants began to fade. For some, these were necessary sacrifices in the fight for survival, but for others, they represented a dangerous erosion of the values that humanity had always held dear. Cade's methods, while undeniably effective, raised uncomfortable questions about the cost of victory. Was it worth winning if it meant losing the very principles that humanity had fought to protect? As the war continued, these questions became harder to ignore. The public, once united behind Cade's leadership, began to show signs of unease. Support for the war remained strong, but there was a growing concern about the direction it was taking and the price that was being paid. Meanwhile, the Galactic Alliance was also feeling the strain. What had started as a confident campaign to bring humanity to heel had devolved into a desperate struggle for survival. Cade's relentless assault had pushed the Alliance to the brink, forcing them to commit more and more resources to a war they were no longer certain they could win. The once powerful coalition, which had seemed invincible at the start of the conflict, was beginning to fracture under the pressure. Member species within the Alliance, who had once stood together in the belief that humanity would be an easy conquest, were now questioning the wisdom of continuing the war. The losses they had suffered were unprecedented, and the prospect of facing a never-ending conflict with no clear path to victory was causing rifts to form within the Alliance's leadership. Some factions began to advocate for peace talks, fearing that continued resistance would only lead to their eventual destruction. Others, more entrenched in their pride and hatred for humanity, pushed for an escalation of the conflict, refusing to back down despite the mounting evidence that they were fighting a losing battle. The desperation within the Alliance was palpable. Resources were stretched thin, and the once unified command structure was now plagued by infighting and dissent. The pressure to deliver a decisive victory was immense, but every attempt to do so was met with fierce resistance from human forces. The Alliance's leaders, who had once dismissed humanity as a minor obstacle, were now forced to confront the reality that they had vastly underestimated their enemy. The war that was supposed to secure their dominance in the galaxy had instead become a quagmire, draining their strength and undermining their authority. As the war dragged on, both sides were forced to reckon with the costs they had incurred. For humanity, the question was whether they could continue to follow a leader who was willing to sacrifice so much for victory. For the Alliance, the question was whether they could afford to keep fighting a war that was tearing them apart from within. The once clear objectives of the conflict had become mired in the complexities of survival, pride, and the ever-present fear of defeat. The final offensive launched by President Cade was as bold as it was decisive. After years of grueling conflict, humanity's forces, now seasoned and hardened by countless battles, were ready to deliver the blow that would end the war. Cade, who had spent months meticulously planning this assault, knew that this was humanity's best chance to break the Galactic Alliance once and for all. The offensive was a multi-pronged assault, targeting the Alliance's most critical systems with a combination of brute force and strategic precision. Fleets of human warships, supported by advanced AI-driven drones and stealth units, surged into Alliance territory, striking at their most vulnerable points. The Alliance, already weakened and divided by internal dissent, was caught off guard by the sheer ferocity and coordination of the attack. Their defenses crumbled under the relentless pressure, and within weeks, key systems that had been linchpins of the Alliance's power fell into human hands. The loss of these systems left the Alliance's military in disarray, unable to regroup or mount an effective counterattack. With their infrastructure in ruins and their fleets decimated, the Alliance's leaders had no choice but to sue for peace. They had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they were paying the price. Cade's victory was a moment of triumph for humanity. For the first time in their history, they had stood up to the galaxy's most powerful coalition and emerged victorious. The terms of the peace agreement were dictated by humanity, with the Alliance forced to recognize human sovereignty over the territories they had fought so hard to defend. Additionally, the Alliance was required to pay reparations and dismantle much of its military infrastructure, ensuring that they would not pose a threat to humanity again. However, the victory was far from pure. The war had exacted a heavy toll on both sides, and the aftermath was a time of reflection as much as celebration. For Cade, the triumph was bittersweet. He had secured humanity's place as a major power in the galaxy, but the cost had been immense. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble, millions of lives had been lost, and the moral compromises made along the way weighed heavily on his conscience. Cade's leadership had been effective, but it had also led humanity down a path of destruction that many found difficult to reconcile with their ideals. The consequences for the Galactic Alliance were even more severe. Their defeat shattered the illusion of invincibility that had once surrounded them. Member species, disillusioned by the leadership's failure and the catastrophic losses they had suffered, began to leave the coalition. The Alliance, once a symbol of galactic unity and power, was now fracturing under the weight of its own hubris. Leaders who had been at the forefront of the war effort were discredited, their reputations ruined by the disastrous outcome. Internal strife and power struggles became the new norm within the remnants of the Alliance, as different factions vied for control in the power vacuum left by the war. As the dust settled, both humanity and the galaxy at large were left to contemplate the war's impact. Cade's victory had undeniably changed the course of history, but it had also left humanity with a complicated legacy. The image of humans as a peaceful and diplomatic species had been irrevocably altered. The galaxy now viewed humanity with a mix of fear and respect, recognizing their strength but also wary of their potential for ruthlessness. Cade's leadership had proven that humanity was capable of great power, but it had also shown that such power came with a heavy burden. The war had forced humanity to confront difficult questions about their identity and their future. The values they had once held dear, values of justice, compassion, and restraint, had been challenged by the realities of survival in a hostile galaxy. Cade had made the choices he believed were necessary to protect his people, but those choices had left scars that would take generations to heal. The victory, while securing humanity's place in the galaxy, had also come at the cost of their moral innocence. In the end, the story of the war was not just one of conquest or survival, but of the profound changes it brought to all who were involved. Humanity had proven their strength, but they had also been changed by the very war that had secured their future. The galaxy, once a place where the strong preyed on the weak, had been shown that even the most underestimated species could rise to power. But with that power came new responsibilities and new challenges. As humanity looked to the future, they knew that they could not afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. The war had taught them that survival in the galaxy required both strength and wisdom.